would say let's go ahead and start. And perfect. Okay, so studies have shown that diverse teams outperform less diverse comparison groups with regards to profitability significantly. And at the same time, according to recent research from Gallup, more than 80% of CHROs say the organization's investment into DEIB is increasing. And more than 2/3 of job seekers consider workplace diversity an important factor when considering employment opportunities. So the importance of DEIB is evident, but many still struggle to make measures meaningful for their employees. This is why today we will have a look at how to implement diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging along the employee lifecycle and analyze practical approaches that will help HR and leaders to excel. But before we start, we want to make this as interactive as possible. So we want to encourage you to take part through Slido, but also the Q&A section. And we will take all the questions as we go along or answer them in the end in the Q&A part. So feel free to scan the code and then you can enter the Slido with the hashtag DEIB. Awesome. And then, without further ado, I'm very excited. Let's welcome our guest speakers, Royan, Melanie, and Kim today. I'm very, very happy to have you. And let's maybe go ahead and start. Melanie, could you maybe quickly introduce yourself and let us know what diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging mean to you and why they matter so much?
Yeah, thank you so very much. And thank you for having me. My name is Melanie. I'm the country manager for DEIB in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. DEIB is a 2015 founded scale-up company. We're a unicorn, and we offer an HRIS platform that covers the entire life cycle of an employee within a company. We have 850 employees around the globe, and I do believe we are a very diverse company, and maybe I get to share more about this in our conversation. But if we look at the male and female ratio within the company, we are at a 50-50 split. But for me, of course, diversity is not about gender only, right? If we speak and think about diversity, we need to look at ethnicity, at age, at sexual orientation, at lifestyle, at talent, personality characteristics, physical disabilities, as well as personal beliefs. All of that to me is part of diversity. And when we think diversity in the sense of a company, it is what is creating a sense of belonging. It is what giving us purpose and what is also giving us various views. You said it in the beginning, we see the effects on profitability, but we also know that diverse teams have less turnover almost reduced by up to 27%. We also know that we can reduce safety incidents in more diverse teams by up to 40%. And on top, you can actually increase productivity by almost up to 12%. So for me, diversity is about representation, it's about different views, and ultimately it is about creating a culture that everyone can strive in and that is going to be beneficial for the business.
Thanks a lot, Melanie. Thanks for the first insights. Then over to Royan. It's so exciting for me to learn from you today and your experience at Oliver Wyman. Could you maybe also quickly introduce yourself and share some of your experiences? Did you have any experiences in your career that were like very positive or negative examples of DEIB?
Fantastic, thanks, Ramsey. So, hi everyone, I'm Royan, Global Director of Diversity, Inclusion and Belonging at Oliver Wyman, a strategy consulting firm. So my role spans from all the way from Australia to the West Coast in the US, so quite a busy role. And in terms of what this means to me, really my interest in it started in childhood. So I was born in a super patriarchal society, Guyana, in South America. So when you're in Guyana, the tradition is that although girls go to school, I went to the best school, you're not really expected to do that well. Most of the senior government officials, most of the people in political life, they're all men. And so I think there was just something for me that it was just unfair. I happened to be born a woman, but suddenly I wasn't as worth as much. And the paradox was my dad would say to me things like, oh, imagine how much you'd achieve if only you were one of my sons. And I didn't even understand why that was a comparison. So I think I then just decided I was going to be better than any boy I'd ever met in my life, and that I was going to make something of myself. And I took that restless ambition into a career into diversity and inclusion. And for me, at the cornerstone of what we do is equity and ensuring that people have the ability to have equal outcomes. And I think that's been a real shift when I started in this work over 20 years ago. And I know that must shock so many of you because I look like a teenager. But when I started in this work so many years ago, we talked about equality and we were all really comfortable with that word, and we talked about equal opportunities. And then the penny dropped and I realized that actually equal opportunities is like opening the door and saying, well, everyone could go through the door, but the door is only 2 foot tall. So only the people that fit through that door are going to get through the door. But technically, we all have the opportunity to go in. So it's really about the outcomes. Do we all have the chance to get into the building, not whether we can just enter the building? And as I've progressed in this work, I've done this work across a range of topics, so LGBTQ inclusion, also looking at gender, race, ethnicity, caring responsibilities as well, older parents, children. So I've looked at this from the range. I've realized that one of the things that companies really fail to do is listen. Is that often they employ people like me to come up with amazing initiatives. And those initiatives risk falling flat if you haven't listened to what the people want. So there's a really great book, Love Languages. It's about relationships and how to have a great relationship with your partner. But I realized we can apply that to our work as well. Because if I'm not speaking the equity language or the inclusion language that the people in the organization want, then they'll never be grateful for it. They'll never engage with it and we'll never make progress. So for me, it's about listening and giving people the opportunity to tell you what they need and trying as hard as possible to meet that need.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing, Royan. Then finally, Kim, great to have you too. Could you also tell us who you are and what you want to add? Did you have any memorable experiences with regards to DEIB in your career so far?
Yeah, thanks first of all for having me here too and being in this round with Royan and Melanie. Really looking forward to our discussion. Yeah, my name is Kim. I'm one of the founders of Like-Minded. You might have heard about it. It's a mental health company that is providing employees with mental support around any topic. And I'm by background a psychologist. And I think the perspective that I would like to bring in today is really the perspective from a psychological standpoint, because when we talk about diversity, first of all, science has shown already since years that the most diverse groups create the best results. So that is actually no question anymore, according to science. But when we look into the real life situation, we still find that a lot of companies are struggling with that. We still also see that a lot of groups who are diverse or teams that are diverse struggle with a lot of conflict because of diverse opinions and do not really find the way to the right solution because they struggle so much with the conflict and might get lost on the way. And I think that is exactly where we have to also start and look into how can we empower people to work together in a very diverse team and in a very diverse environment. How can we learn better to actually execute conflict, to make the best of it, to then create the best results? And then there's also another point about biases. Melanie, you just mentioned it quickly. So all of us are falling prone to unconscious, subconscious biases. And also psychological science has shown that even if we are aware about these biases, we still fall prey to these biases. So we are not really able to manage them. And I think that's it sounds frustrating in the first place, but it's a very important learning. And there are ideas and ways of how we can get better in managing biases, and that requires different ways. So in my opinion, first of all, psychological education around it. And then second of all, also setting the structure and the environment to really make it work, because sometimes it doesn't only help that an individual has understood it, but also, as Rayon said, that we actually lead with the right initiatives and that we just that we don't start just adding any initiatives, but that we actually find the right initiatives. So it's a really, really complex topic also from the psychological perspective. And that's why I'm super happy to hear also your point of views today, because also from my perspective, I think there is still a lot to learn. When I look at our company, for example, we are very diverse, but we are a small company yet. We are 40 people. We have lots of different cultures in the team. Even in our co-founder team, we are 3 different cultures, 3 different cultural backgrounds. Then I'm working with 3 male co-founders, so I'm the only female founder in that company. That also sometimes requires, let's say, a long, better understanding and also being tough from time to time, because of course I don't have a lot of other females I can relate to in these situations. But what I've also found is that even though we sometimes have a lot of conflict, we find better solutions in the end. And that was for me a very important understanding and realization. And I can help. I hope I can contribute to that conversation from this perspective today. Really looking forward.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Kim. You already dove right into the broader organizational topic. Let's maybe take a little bit of a zoom and look at the employee lifecycle first. So let's maybe talk about how companies can effectively integrate the DEIB principles into their strategies, especially when it comes to employer branding and recruitment strategies. So the very beginning of the employee lifecycle to attract diverse and a diverse pool of talents and candidates. So maybe Royan, can you give us some insights about how you're doing this at Oliver Wyman, or also what best practices you have seen so far?
Sure, thank you. And I love the fact that you talk about attraction, because I think we use the word attraction and then we don't actually do attraction. So we tend to decide in a room, this is the message we're going to put out there, and we don't think about whether it's attractive to the people. And if I share a couple of anecdotes, I remember working with a company a few years ago, and they said to me, we're really struggling to attract women. And I went on their website. If I'm working with a company, the first thing I do is look at their website to get a sense of what story are you telling, because I think storytelling is the most powerful tool in employer branding and recruitment, but it's actually the one tool that we don't use very effectively. And so imagine this is a company that looks at transport and infrastructure, and the images that they had were hard hats, high-vis vests, scarves, work boots. And they said, you see, we don't use people. So that's attracting women, because otherwise we'd have to use all men. And I said, but you've used what is traditionally very male clothing. So just looking at the clothes still sends a message that this is a dressing room for men. This is for the boys. This isn't for women. So I think that storytelling and attraction is really important. And also when we think of storytelling is how many branding teams have actually walked through the website from the user perspective. So asking themselves to imagine, I'm a woman who wants to work for this company. What messages am I getting unintentionally? Because all of it's unintentional. And what we have to shift is to be more intentional. We should be at the point where people are almost knocking down your doors to work for you to find out which jobs are available. And instead there's this stalemate of
Okay, I think there might be a little bit of a connection issue, but I'm sure Royan is back in a second. For the time being, Melanie, might you want to jump in and share a bit of your experiences at HiBob, what you do, especially in the area of employer branding and recruiting?
I think one important point for me is always quotas, right? For a long time, I asked myself, do we need quotas? Is this something we want to have? But I fundamentally believe in it because it sets clear targets and objectives for what we are striving for. I think we need to get away from seeing DEIB as something we all talk about, but then not committing ourselves to it. So I think it's having clear quotas and targets on whom we want to hire and how diverse we would like to hire. Rayanne spoke about ultimately also language policing, I would almost say. So having a language and using a language that is inclusive. It also means that we have pronouns on our websites, in our application forms that candidates are being addressed in. I think it's pieces around being able to work from anywhere and having more flexibility to work in a hybrid setup. It is flexible working hours, especially when we look at women and female talent. We know that that is something that is helping to strive. It could be having the option to actually share a role and share it with the colleagues. It's the values and the culture that we represent externally. And then I also think there's great platforms out there that actually focus on skill-based assessments, removing that unconscious bias, helping us to look at talent that would have been otherwise been overlooked. And there's also great tools out there like Witty Works that actually analyzes speech and then mirrors a non-inclusive language. So I think these are all things that we can actually do. It may be platform solutions, but it's also the way that we act and represent ourselves externally.
Awesome. Thanks a lot. So, Rayanne, we just took a dive into some different topics like quotas and skill-based assessments. But we probably cut you off right in the middle of what you wanted to share. So feel free to jump back in.
Thank you. And sorry, there was an accident outside that pulled some wires down. So fingers crossed. So for me, one of the things we're doing at Oliver Wyman is thinking about how we marry up the whole concept of role models. So when you have role models and people who are on social media and very public figures, often candidates, contact them and say, how do I work for you? And instead of trying to navigate through a very complex system of talk to this hiring manager, especially as a global firm, trying to match a candidate from one country with one. So what we're looking to do is just have a couple of mailboxes where we can direct all the candidates and then filter. So it's our job to filter, not the candidate's job to try to navigate the complexities of our organization. So that simplification around attraction and recruitment is really important. And then also having different recruiting strategies. Again, we tend to have a single recruiting strategy without thinking of how different groups like to be contacted, the need for panel discussions as well, how you look at mitigating bias across the system, and also just the simplification and the humanity of a recruitment process, the ability for someone to ask questions, making sure that we're really intentional that if you have additional needs, and using words like additional, not special. So not words that make people feel deficient, but additional needs. And that then opens a broader breadth of conversation around things like social mobility. So that additional need might be as simple as it's cheaper to travel to your offices in off-peak time rather than on-peak, because that can be, a real price differential, which could impact someone who comes from a lower socioeconomic group. It's as simple as someone who isn't legally visually impaired, but actually works better with bigger letters or works better with time to pause. So it's really opening that individual conversation about what does an individual need to succeed versus we're just going to throw something out there and hope that everyone can engage with it.
Yeah, I really like that. So
maybe,
oh, sorry, yeah,
maybe Franzi, I can also jump in to add a few thoughts and comments here before you go to the next question. I really like what you've just said about the initiatives and conditions that we need to set up in order, for example, to really address people from different cultures, females as well as males, and so forth. When you were talking about it, and also Melanie, when you were mentioning the quotas, I also believe in quotas nowadays. Back then, when I was younger, I thought, no, I don't need it. Like, we can go the way, we don't need quotas. But actually, right now, I'm 100% convinced that we do need quotas, because human beings are not strong enough to overcome their own biases. So we will need it as a support system. And on top of that, I think the biggest power still has authenticity. So what I experience a lot, I talk, for example, to other founders, especially male founders, and they get to hear here and there, yeah, we're not going to invest in you because you're a complete male founders team and you're all from, I don't know, the same background. So you're not diverse enough, and we're not gonna invest into them. And I have a lot of discussions around that with these founders, because they feel like they are unfairly treated. Also with VC or investors who say, yeah, we don't have any female partners in our team, but the reason is we cannot find someone. So what I often hear is, we cannot find these people. And I think, in my opinion, then you have to search harder. It's going to require more effort to really change the system. That's really my standpoint here, because it won't be easy. For sure, it won't be easy, because we are the ones who are breaking up the system. We are the ones changing the system. We are the ones making it more equal and bringing in diversity. And of course, in the beginning, it will be harder, because these people are not there in the same quantity. And what I'm saying here, I think, yes, of course, you can try to find the right wording. But if you have, for example, a female founder or leader in your team, or someone from a different culture, it will automatically happen that you choose different words. So you don't, because it will trickle down. And I think the easiest way is actually to find people in your leadership team, in your managing director team, in your founder team of different backgrounds, because then it will happen automatically, because they are there, they help find the right wordings. And so there I would definitely say, yeah, it requires effort, and it requires actually the will. So I won't accept the excuse of, yeah, we cannot find someone.
Thanks a lot for sharing. And you already mentioned how this translates into the operations of companies as well, right? So let's maybe have a look at that. What can we then actually do when we manage to recruit a diverse workforce? How can we make them all feel welcome from the start? What can HR and leaders do in particular to make everybody feel included in the company culture? Is there certain things we should look out for? I think this is just a natural extension of what we just talked about. Maybe Melanie, do you want to share some insights?
Absolutely. So I think the first thing that we should really do is to have personalized pre-onboarding, but also onboarding flows that welcome someone into the organization, that gives them a sense of the culture that they can expect, the people that they are going to work with, and that there is going to give them immediate insight into who is this company, who am I going to work with. I also think that it's great to give people the option to share about themselves and to give insight into some of their preferences. So what is your preferred pronoun? What is your gender? What is your gender identity? What is the languages that you speak? What are some of the hobbies that you have? So I know in my company, 9% of our employees love to do yoga as much as I do. I can reach out to those individuals and maybe suggest to do a yoga class in the morning together virtually, because we are a very global company, but it is something that makes me feel connected outside of my day-to-day team and outside of my general work activities. We also have something in the company where we are sharing superpowers. It's something that I'm really, really good at. And if you need me to do something for you that is maybe special or extraordinary, I can extend my help. It can also be sharing the ethnicity. It is, whether you're maybe neurodiverse, right? It is giving insight about you as an individual, and by that being able to navigate the organization differently. I would say the other thing that immediately then adds on top of it is clubs, right? Where you can connect to like-minded peers, right? It's creating that sense of belonging through common values, shared interests. We have the option, in case that things go wrong, to voice concerns and to also report misconduct, right? This is also a legal obligation to actually have. And this is a whistleblowing solution. In our case, we call it Your Voice, but it's something where in the case that something is severely wrong, I would have an opportunity to anonymously share that something wasn't in the way that I would expect it. I think even in onboarding, pay parity, and that goes back maybe to hiring, and it's part of the conversations that we have once someone is on board, is important. And to always analyze, how do you pay by gender, by performance rating, by role? Is this all being fair? And are people being treated equally? I think having ERGs is something that is also going to give people an immediate sense of belonging into the culture. And then, of course, your leader. We as leaders play a fundamental role in welcoming different talent into the organization. And it's, again, the way that we communicate, the way that we interact. I think as part of onboarding, mentoring programs can be something great to do, to have someone with either similar or a very diverse background engage with that individual. And for me, it is about education. Also offering trainings on diversity, on inclusion. We just had a training on how to navigate different cultures. Why do we talk differently? How do I react to this? And it gave me a great understanding of how can I be sometimes perceived, and why is that maybe difficult for a colleague that was brought up socially very different. And then it's build the manager relationship, nurture the strengths of the people. This is, well, a lot of things we can do in onboarding, but I think it's really ensuring that the employee identifies with the company and that the individual is able to share and find people with a common set of ground.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love that, like, especially the first point you mentioned, it revolves a lot around like creating opportunities to connect, right? And the whole topic of identification. Ryan, you probably also have a lot of experiences how to create opportunities for identification with the company, right? Are there any particular that stood out to you in the past that you would like to share?
Yeah, absolutely. I love everything Melanie said about those big community moments, really looking at the processes and policies. I also think there's a phrase that our parent company, Marsh McLennan, has, which is the moments that matter. And I think there's also the small things that build connection. Often when you ask people for their memory of their first day, it's not the big thing, it's the small thing. And so I hope she's not on the line, but I have someone new joining my team. And I've already got a plan to give like a box to her with book recommendations from the rest of the team, because that helps connect in with the team. And I'm going to be flying to New York to onboard her in person. So on her first day, there will be a gift and I'll be there to say welcome to the team, which I think is really important as well with virtual teams, is as soon as you can, meeting someone in person really sets you up to have a successful virtual relationship. I also think when we now have a formula for our onboarding in terms of our induction training, and the formula is tell them what inclusion and diversity means in this business, because it means something different in every business. So actually ensuring people know what we mean when we talk about it. So tell them what we mean, tell them what they can expect. So what will we give to them? How will we show up from that vision? What do we expect from them? So this is your right to, so we talk about your right to be included and your responsibility to be inclusive. So really articulate to them, this is what you can get and this is what we're going to need from you. And then the fourth part of it is, and if you fail to get any of those things, here's who you talk to. If at any point we're failing on one of those three preceding points, here's where you go for help and support. So really embedding that from day one is the expectation, level set on what that means, and what do we need from you? Because I think sometimes you miss that in onboarding, and it's really important to really give that. But like I said, I think those small gifts, the small rituals as well, having a buddy. So on my team, everyone who starts has a buddy who knows the organization a bit better. And frankly, because all of this is informed by my worst ever induction, which was my manager didn't even tell me where the bathroom was. And luckily, at that time, I worked in the same company as my mum, but she was on a different floor. And so for 6 weeks, I used to go to the bathroom on her floor because it's the one I knew where to find it from. And my induction conversation consisted of, here is the shared drive, familiarize yourself with the structure. And then the manager went on holiday. So I always take that as my how not to onboard, and I try to give a very different experience.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. Yeah, really sorry that it went that way. Yeah, so just a minute ago, Kim, you also mentioned how in the startup world and amongst founders, there's a great disparity between male and females and how they're perceived. I think this is also very true when it comes to performance management, progression. We know that female-led startups are a lot less funded. And obviously, there's also still a huge gender pay gap. According to last measures, we're around 18% between men and women. And then there's also a migration pay gap between employees with and without a migration background. So in the context of performance evaluations, career growth, but also compensation, how can companies ensure that employees' contributions, regardless of the background, are equally recognized and rewarded? And I think, Kim, you probably have some interesting thoughts on this, right?
Yeah, for sure. So when we talk about it, I think you have to kind of differentiate between fighting the symptoms and actually finding the reason behind it. And especially when we look at the pay gaps between gender pay gap or even with migration background, I think we have to understand where do they actually come from? Because only if we understand where the pay gaps really stem from, we can start eliciting initiatives and start working on changing structures in the system in order to really fight it and in order to really change it and transform it. And especially when we are looking at the gender pay gap, we all know that one of the main reasons still is that when women become pregnant, when they start building a family, they leave the job for a couple of time, and when they come back, they kind of miss this next career jump compared to a male in the same age group, and they kind of never catch up with them again. Yeah, also because oftentimes they go back in part-time because it's not possible for them to work full-time while doing 100% or 80% of the care work. And we do know that still most of the women are doing most of the care work at home, so they can't go back into a full-time job. And when we understand these things, we can understand that what we have to change is the system and the structure and the way we build our organizations. So we actually have to think about ways how we can build an environment, a workplace in which women with children can go for their career as well as men go for their career. We also have to talk about how can we balance care work between men and women, for example. We also have to talk about why are only women going into parental leave, or like I think around 13 or 14 months, Melanie, I think you shared some numbers the last time we talked, whereas a male or men only go around 3 months into parental leave, right? And especially in Germany, it's even promoted that way, yeah? So that men take less parental leave. It's still stigmatized. So there are lots of factors that we need to take a look at, and structural things that we can and have to change in order to change these gaps. For example, in other countries, or I think in the Nordics, for example, men and women have to take the same amount of parental leave. So they are forced to do it. And I think that's actually a good way, because when you're forcing them, both go off, yeah, both are away from the career, both have time for the children, they can balance the care work, and when they go back, both of them can equally focus on their career again. So I think there are lots of things we can do from a structural perspective to change these gaps. But first of all, I think it's really, really, really important to understand where do these gaps really stem from.
And I'd love to add to this because I think it's the piece of the understanding. But how do we understand? We understand through data. And I think in often cases, we are in companies actually lacking the data to compare and analyze and to have the insight. Because we have different data sources and various systems, and maybe we don't track certain information. But I think one piece is really having the data and the option to analyze. Whom do we have within our company? What's their gender identity? What is their age, right? In what role and positions do we have those people? How are we paying them in comparison? And only if we have this insight, we can actually act upon it and ensure then that we are paying our people fairly because of what they do and because of the performance that they bring, but not because someone sits in the office or we like that person better, or that person actually sits next to us, or that person is very similar to us. We depend and have been in the past very much on the nose factor. But I think this is something where as companies, we have to invest to actually have the data internally to then take action upon. I think another beautiful thing to do actually is to do surveys and to check in with your employees. For me, the Net Promoter Score is a great way to see, are we an attractive and inclusive employer? Do people actually want to work for us, and would they recommend working in the company? And if not so, what are the actions that we can actually take? Because the biggest thing that we as companies have to ensure is that the employees we have on board are going to stay with us, because we all know there's not enough people and talent out there. So we need to ensure that the ones that we have on board are going to stay. So I think really knowing your data, but also looking at, for example, a Net Promoter Score, amongst other data, retention, turnaround data, conducting inclusion surveys or stay interviews, right? Having performance assessments, and then clear guidelines also for promotions, I think is something that employers can do to make certain that the workplace is becoming more diverse and more inclusive.
Ramsey, can I jump in with just an additional perspective here?
Absolutely.
As well? So one of the things I love about pay gap data is that the pay gap starts with pocket money that young girls get. So girls between 5 and 16, a few years ago, there was a study that showed that girls between 5 and 16 get less money from their parents than their brothers do. So this is a mindset problem that starts way before. And so in addition to the data and structures, I also think there's something about challenging the mindset. So Melanie said we often depend on our nose. And I remember working with a company, and they were saying to me really proudly, they said, you know, in our next round of partner hires, we've got a man and a woman. And you could see that they felt really proud. And I said, talk to me about their compensation. So that's one tip, but talk to me about the compensation. And they said, well, he's coming in on a higher salary. Why? Well, because, he asked for more money. Okay. Are they doing a substantially different job? No. Do they have substantially different experience? Well, actually, she's a bit more experienced than him. Okay, but you're giving him more money because he asked for more money. Okay. Why? Well, you know, he's in demand. Is he? How do you know? He told us that he has some offers on the table. Have you got any way to verify that he has offers on the table? No. Okay, what harm would it do for you to pay them both the same starting salary? Nothing. Okay, so why aren't you doing it? So it's that mindset shift, and it's how you have people in organizations who take the role on to challenge and to just mirror and play back for groups what they're actually saying, because sometimes the playback is really powerful, and you see more people understanding that actually you don't have to give a candidate more money because they claim to have lots of offers on the table. Actually, if it's not going to impact your bottom line, why not bring everyone up at the starting point? Because as Kim says, if you then put that woman then goes off, she started behind, then she takes time off for maternity leave, and suddenly that gap just gets wider and wider and wider. where does it end? So I think there's also a behavioral change, and, you know, finding ways to actually challenge in those rooms is also powerful as well to back up the data.
Yeah.
Royanne, maybe just a question also from my side. I really find that a super important point that you mentioned. Challenge the person, mirror them, ask them questions, also show them data, explain to them what might be behind it, so that they start understand themselves. Because I think most often these people don't do it with a negative intention, right? They just don't think about it.
Totally.
What would be your advice to companies, maybe also people who are listening right now, how they can start implementing that way of challenging? Like, would you say every leader has to do it and has to learn it? Or would you say hire someone with, for example, your background, your expertise, who can support you with that? Like, what would be your advice for implementing that really and making that a reality?
Sure. So at Oliver Wyman, Kim, you might know we've got a process called inclusionators. So that is really inclusion facilitators. So my team every year takes a group of people through a process of training on recognizing the type of language, the type of phrases that are clues that a decision might not be being made based on rational and objective information. So, for instance, when someone says, I can see the perfect candidate in my mind, immediately ask them to articulate what they see in their mind, because every one of us will build a picture that will have gender in it, it will have height sometimes. And so once you've got that in your mind, anyone that doesn't look like that will be rejected. So we take a group of colleagues through every year training on how to recognize language that's coded or language that could be a flag to something else. And then we insert them into decision-making processes. But we also ask and prime the leader. So whichever leader is responsible for that decision-making conversation, their job is to prime everyone to accept the challenge, to say this individual is here to give us challenge. That's their role. And so when they ask for space in the room, don't shout them down, don't talk over them, listen to them. And the leader also plays a supportive role, as well as having that independent person. Another piece of best practice I've seen in other organizations that it takes a lot of data is, for instance, in a promotion and compensation review, you'd have someone from the HR community who sits there and they have the demographic data of every individual. So they know what gender the person is, what ethnicity. And what they do is they say, okay, make all the decisions, and they're listening. And then they say, based on the decisions you've made, like only 10% of women are receiving a pay rise, only 5% of people of color. Are you all comfortable when I play that back to you as an aggregate? Because also we find that every individual decision can often be justified. You can often justify it. It's when you look at the aggregate that you take a step back and say, whoa, what must have been happening? Something's happening, because it's impossible that we would have kept arriving at the same outcome for women, for instance. So that's another piece of best practice. It's having someone in the room who has the demographics. They keep them confidential, but they play back the trends to a room and say, are you comfortable? If challenged, would you be comfortable with this outcome? And often groups at that point say no, and then they say, well, who do we need to look harder at? And the last thing I'll say is, when we think about performance reviews, which often have the biggest impact on pay progression, one of the things I always really harsh on is if someone gives me a curve and everyone's in the middle box, I say, no, something's wrong here, because you should always have poor performers. And if you're reticent to say who the poor performers are, then I question the people that you think are the top performers. So what can look like a really easy task where you're like, oh, everyone got the middle box, I immediately say, no, we need to deconstruct this, because there's something here in the way we do feedback and decision making that's not giving us a true picture. No organization has lots of solid mediocre people. That's just not reality. There have to be outliers.
Yeah. And you interestingly already touched upon the performance management topic, right? And I think this is the one that comes before the compensation one and is the driver for the compensation one. So Melanie, you probably have something to add for this as well, how you're also ensuring that during performance management, you're already taking an inclusive look at people.
Yes, absolutely. I think for me, performance reviews is really looking at, what did the employee contribute to the organization, and to make that, again, a guided process, right? You need to set clear goals and objectives for individuals to strive for, and you facilitate discussion around this, and you involve additional people into the process. This is the thing I really like, right? Make it independent from just the managerial view, but involve peers, right? Involve people that work with this individual on a day-to-day basis to get insight. I currently heard about a great performance review process that another company is doing, where it's all peer focused, and they involve different people at different points of time, and then they gather that feedback and they analyze it, and they do it with the mindset of, we want to foster the skills and the strength that you bring, and we are trying to make you even better in what you're already good at. And I think this is a beautiful way to look at performance, and to then have very open and candid discussions. For me, a lot is about the culture that we have, the way that we build and foster the relationships within the organization. But again, if you also have clear objectives set that you hold yourself, the team, your employees accountable for, I think this is where you can at least start to remove that bias and make it something that is more measurable. And again, that doesn't depend on just one view, but that also incorporates the people that work very closely with a certain individual.
Thanks a lot for sharing. I think looking at the time, I would actually hop to our last question that revolves around the sense of belonging. And I think what's really interesting to see is when looking at the numbers, over 80% of employees say that biases, and Kim, you talked about this before, negatively affected also their happiness and confidence and well-being. So question for us right now would be like, to promote employee well-being and a strong sense of belonging across the entire workforce, what initiatives can HR and leaders implement? And Kim, I'm pretty sure you have some very good ideas and initiatives about this.
Yes, for sure. But before that, I would like to pick up again the statement I made in the beginning, that science has shown that it's very hard for human beings to overcome biases, even though they know about them. And I want to make another point here, which is very important to understand. It is, of course, possible to reduce biases. For example, and that's why I really like the point Royanne was bringing, by having someone who is mirroring you, having someone who's challenging you. So really into that direction of a psychologist or a coach who's actually talking to you and asking you questions in order to realize that you may be thinking into the wrong pathway. So yes, there are ways of really reducing biases. And I would really suggest and recommend to get you support. And another support way could also be to have a diverse leadership team, for example, because when you, Melanie, we're now talking about performance management, 360 degrees feedback and so forth. But I also realize when we have our promotion committees between the four of us and plus some of the leaders, actually all of the perspectives are represented. I'm representing rather the female perspective, my co-CEOs representing the German male perspective, my Spanish co-founder is bringing in a different cultural view. So I think this is also something that can already do a big part of the job. If you have people from diverse backgrounds in the leadership team, in the teams where decisions are going to be taken, that's already doing a big deal, a part of the deal actually. But yeah, to come back to the question, Franzi, to promote employee well-being and belonging, I think first of all, what we should know is, and I found that statistics really shocking when I heard about it the first time. There's recent statistics and science that show that leaders have as much impact on the mental well-being of the employees as their partners, as their romantic partners. That's incredible. And romantic partners and leaders are the ones with the biggest impact on the well-being of people. It's crazy. And when I heard that, I was also reflecting on myself, because what lies behind it is that actually leaders, or that stress is actually can be infectious. So when I'm stressed as a leader, no matter what I try to do, my people will feel it and they get stressed too. So I think here it's very, very important for everyone listening right now who's in a leadership role to understand that in the first place, and then reflect on what can you actually do to work on your own stress level. Because when you work on increasing your own mental well-being and health, you have a way easier job to implement that into your teams as well and into the company. So I think that's one of the first steps, to really understand from a leader perspective what I'm feeling will be somehow mirrored in my team and my company. So I think that's one of the first things. And then, of course, there are other ways. I also loved, Ryan, that you mentioned in the beginning the love languages, because I actually accepted yesterday an invitation by the team to a love language workshop that we have next week in the company. And that is also one of the initiatives that you can use in order to create belonging, for example, because in these moments when you're sitting down with your team and discussing different ways of how we function, what we feel, how we feel loved, how we don't feel loved, how we give love, yeah, that's of course now in a very, you shouldn't perceive it in a romantic way, but rather in a how do I feel appreciated way. And in these moments, people really connect with each other when they show vulnerability towards each other, when they start understanding their weaknesses and strengths. That's incredibly bonding and creating belonging to your colleagues, but also to the company you're working at. And I think, yeah, that's one of the initiatives I could really recommend.
Thanks a lot. Ryan, you probably have one to add as well, around like how you foster a sense of belonging at Oliver Wyman.
Absolutely. So one of the things analogies we use is thrive now, and actually literally think of plants. No, so plants don't thrive when you protect them from all of the elements. Plants thrive when you give them the opportunity to experience failure safely, to not get watered, to wilt, and then have to figure out how to come back to life when you give them some input. But also every plant has a very different need and a very different balance of sunshine, water, all of that. So we're developing a program, Thrive Advocates program, which is a proactive way to have well-being conversations with people. So you go onto the program for 6 months and you have a well-being conversation once a month for 6 months. And in that well-being conversation, there's a check-in first. How are you doing? Is there anything that you feel would help you thrive at this moment? Is there anything that you feel would help you thrive? Do you know how to ask for that? Or do you need me to? So we have trained colleagues who can then take on asking on that colleague's behalf. And so it's very proactive. After 6 months, do you assess, are you doing okay? Okay, you can roll off the program. At any given point, a colleague, so we focus on colleagues that we know are quote, quote, at risk. So any groups that we know we've got high attrition, high turnover, or are in high stress moments because of the cycle of work we do. So they are our focus. But any individual at any point could actually do a self-assessment and assess that they would like to come into the program for 6 months. So it's not exclusive, it's completely open. And that's something we do that really goes back to this individualized approach and love languages approaches, helping give people the language of how do I ask for what I need, rather than passively try to figure out what the company's giving me and making it work for me, which is not going to always work. And also, what are your boundaries? So I operate really well under stress and pressure, tight deadlines. That is my happy place. I'm successful in that place. And so when, if I'm filling out a survey that says, were you doing a lot of time-bound work? And I say yes, that might be a red flag for someone else, but for me, it's not a red flag. So really creating the opportunity to have those conversations versus everything being like a survey. So really bringing back the art of conversation into it, because conversation builds nuance and builds the ability to then make an assessment based on what you see in front of you, not just the data and your own assumptions.
Yeah. What I would like to comment on, because I think you made a very important point about give people the language to articulate what they need or how they can ask for support. Because what we also realize, I mean, we are working with lots of companies in order to improve mental well-being of the employees, to implement it into the culture, improve the culture into that direction. And what we realize a lot is that the stigma is still super, super high around mental well-being and mental health. And even if there are some mental health days and some initiatives and some offerings around mental health, a lot of people still struggle to really ask for support, are kind of lost maybe with the initiatives, do not know what they need or what they can make use of, but they don't dare to really ask for it. And I think the more explicit you make it, the more you give the people the words and tell them, hey, this is, by the way, how we are doing it at, for example, Like-Minded. This is how we live mental health. This is how we articulate that we don't feel well. This is how we articulate to ask for support. That's when people feel a bit more empowered to do it because they have words for it. I think that's something super, super important. And then on top of that, I think another point is really, again, into the direction of leadership. When leaders start talking about these things as well, when they are using these words, they open up the room for the people. They open up the space for the people to also talk about it. And this is really not to be underestimated. And then, of course, finally, also having initiatives in place, right? Really having services and offerings that you can give to the employees, so they are not left alone. And of course, this is nothing that HR and leadership can handle themselves. So what we also hear a lot from, especially HR people, they say, you know, I'm overwhelmed. There are so many people coming to me asking for support, but I cannot support them because I'm not a psychologist myself and we don't have any offerings. So I think also here, from a entrepreneur perspective, from a leadership perspective, give HR the right tools and services so that they can actually offer support. I think that's also just as important.
And Kim, you know, on the point of language, one of the things we've changed in terms of languages, so many organizations that we used to do it say, if something's wrong, let us know. But that word wrong, like something's wrong, is actually a really high bar. Because and so we've changed it to if something doesn't feel right. And you don't have to tell us what's wrong, but if there's something that doesn't feel right, or as the young people say, I've got a 17-year-old daughter, if it gives you the ick, then tell someone.
I love it. Yeah.
And that's the shift. It's because people think there's like this huge, it's wrong and I have to, you know, tell someone. And sometimes just I don't feel okay and I don't know how to articulate that.
Okay. Awesome. Thanks a lot for sharing. Thanks a lot for participating. Thank you, Melanie, Royanne, and Kim, for all the experiences and insights and ideas you shared. I think there was a lot we can take out of this. And yeah, looking forward to the next conversation with you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It was very insightful. Hope you have a great day, everyone.
Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Goodbye.